Up now, we have one Frank Hunleth. He's an embedded systems engineer, OSS maintainer, Nerves core team member. At his day job, he uses Elixir and Nerves at a little company called SmartRent, you might have heard of. Provides smart home automation for rental properties when not in front of a computer. He, not unlike myself, loves running and spending time with his family. Here's Frank. Here's Nerves with a Frank update.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for the introduction. So, this is going to be a little different. So I'm actually not going to do the changelog talk. It's because, thankfully, yesterday we had NurseConf. I see a few people who were at NurseConf. Who was not at NurseConf? Okay. Okay, good. Okay, I know how to do things now. So for those of you who missed it, here it is. It looks familiar. This was a ton of fun. I met a ton of people and heard about a lot of neat projects. Speakers in the audience, thank you very much for sharing. So, all right, on to the talk. Nerves. So for those of you who haven't tried it out, it's a way of writing Elixir programs and getting them onto embedded devices, things like Raspberry Pis or BeagleBones. These are single-purpose devices used to do some kind of job, and I'll talk about some of the jobs that these devices do later on. The Nerves project has been around for a little over 10 years or so, although it's evolved in that time. It's on 6 figures worth of devices that I know of. This is like a really tough number to figure out, but somewhere in that range. We've had people use this across quite a few industries that were pretty surprising, and there are a lot of hobbyist users that have created some projects on their own, which has been actually unbelievably cool for me too. So this wasn't going to be a changelog talk, but I am going to talk to you about some of the new things that are happening in Nerves, some of the questions I have going forward, and some of the things that we did recently that I think are a big deal that the bigger audience should know about. But I want to put this in context, and I hope that you all can appreciate some of the thinking that I do and that those of us on the core team do for what kinds of things we work on with the Nerves projects, what our goals are, and how we want to try to make this project a long-lived project, an enjoyable project for both people using it and for those of us maintaining it, and how the things that we do to try to make this less risky for people to take on and use. So there are basically 3 categories. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. Employment is like one of the one that I want to start out with, because without companies actually using the Nerves project, I get to spend a lot less time on it, and the same thing with some of my coworkers and a lot of people in this audience, and it lets us actually pay attention to some of the other things on this slide. So what's it used? I think if you've been around the Elixir community for a while, you've probably seen a few of these pictures. The first one in the upper left, that boat, one of the original Nerves production uses was actually in boats like that, and it was a sensor aggregation project. And the other, then midway down, all of a sudden farming, like I never even, so if I take a step back, nothing I ever worked on was even close to these industries. So this was kind of wild for me as just working on this project. But farming turned out it had a lot of things that Nerves could be used to help build. And you have one indoor farming, and then there's FarmBot, which I think a few people might have for outdoor farming. Lower right is a warehouse. So Nerves was used in more of an operations sense for managing this warehouse. That particular use case was Latote, and that generated tons of improvements to Nerves. And then the one in the middle, and this is, since I'm giving a talk, this is a project that I worked on, so one of my favorites. So my company, SmartRent, we do these IoT gateways and access control gateways. This particular one is a combination thermostat gateway device, and it runs Elixir, Nerves inside of it, probably many Elixir libraries that you all have used are inside this. So what is it that we do? A whole lot of. The thing about nerves that I probably think that many of us spend a lot of our time on now is maintenance of some of these core pieces of it. And it's one of the things we can do is to make it less risky for people to take it on. Because whenever you're taking on in kind of a niche technology and a niche language, which that's where we're in, you want to make sure that people feel comfortable in the components. And I'm speaking to the choir. We all have some interest in the beam, so we of course go through the motions and put in the work to make sure that that works well on these embedded devices. And for the most part, that's not a big deal because the OTP team does a pretty fantastic job at making things work on literally everything that Nerves runs on. So the second thing is Linux, and this is probably the biggest question that I get, like, why does Nerves use Linux? Why not just go straight to Metal or anything like this? It's very pragmatic, and the thing with Linux is that whenever you want to target any hardware, any device, probably someone has written something that works under Linux. So if you build off the Linux kernel, you get that stuff. If the Nerves core team were to just magically go away, which I hope it doesn't happen, but you can rest assured a lot of the code that makes your device work will still be maintained because there are like, what, 1 million people maintaining Linux these days. So we keep up to date. This past year's been doing a lot of security and feature improvements, and we follow the long-term support distributions of Linux for the risk mitigation reasons that I was talking about earlier. Another core component is build root, so that's the build root hat. This is for the rest of the Linux kind of ecosystem that we still use on. It's not much, but it's kind of the backdoor, the escape hatch for if you're building an Elixir project on an embedded system. A lot of companies, it's not like they have like a big Elixir set of libraries and tools and programs. They're coming in with a lot of C++ and C stuff that they can't get translated over to Elixir, or maybe they don't want to. Buildroot is the backdoor to let that happen. And the final one is GCC. I think this one is just like, oh yeah, GCC, of course you use a compiler. This particular one, on Nerves we make tool chains, so that we have known versions that give you the same output, whether you're building on Mac or you're building on a Linux machine. If you're building a year from now and your code was built, you designed your code with GCC 11 or 10 or whatever, it will pull in that older compiler so that you can get something that's maybe not exactly bit for bit because we're not perfect yet, but it will be really close. That thing's a comfortable thing when you have to maintain an embedded device for a long time. And then the question is, why do we stay current with GCC? Well, because there's a lot of cool things you can do if you do this. People who are interested in machine learning, those libraries often pull in some crazy features that they just put in the latest greatest GCC. That's kind of fascinating for the maintenance side. If you need to pull in like a web browser because you're building some sort of kiosk, then all of a sudden you find out that like the Chrome team in Web Engine did something really goofy with C++ that requires a pretty modern GCC or C library. So we do that. And I just wanted to give a couple URLs because people are like, well, what's new with Linux? Or what's new with buildroot? These like are very interesting reads or skims. It's where I go for finding out the new features. There's a lot of stuff buried there. It's kind of an interesting read. So the other thing this past year has been Nerves hardening. So I've been very fortunate right now with a big Nerves deployment, and so this is the question that comes up. We had this talk in yesterday, so Alex McLean touched on it, and others have touched on it. Like, what happens when you start getting these things in the field? Well, you start getting all those 1 million or 100,000 bugs that pop up. So at SmartRent, we use Sentry. We'll get bug reports random times of the day when someone's doing something really goofy with their device that hits some of the core things. So like, one day I woke up and someone was putting null characters inside SSIDs for their Wi-Fi setup. Is that good or bad? Or is someone trying to hack it? There are like weird things that pop up. And then of course, I don't really want to get into the details of all this, but if you like go through our changelog, you can kind of see that this something goofy, like Frank or John or someone else from SmartRent put in some commit that or PR that fixes something that's, you're like, oh, how'd that happen? Well, there's probably a reason. We probably ran into it because we've been running, but because there's a lot of weird stuff that happens in the field, and it's actually super fascinating for some of this stuff. And sometime, if I ever talk with you, I'll share some more stories. All right, so moving on to another one. Nerves Hub. So one key part of Nerves is like the embedded, what actually runs on it. The other part is how do we maintain that fleet of devices that we've built? Well, Nerves Hub is one way. There are other ways, but Nerves Hub is one. It's a pure Elixir server that handles the case where I build a new firmware, new software, how do I get it out? And the idea with Nerves Hub is to make that a reliable thing that happens, and a very safe thing that happens, because most of these devices that get the firmware are like someplace and you just don't want to drive out, if you even can drive out to fix them, or they're in people's houses or other places. This is a very managed process, and Nerves Hub is a tool to work through that process. So the people behind Nerves Hub are not me. I am a very happy user, but Eric, John, and Josh have been working on it quite a bit. And then the thing that I wanted to list was goals for last year. So I gave this talk at this conference last year, and I was just like, okay, we're going to break off Nerves Hub, make it smaller. Eric joined, and he's going through and doing all these things. And like literally every single one I can talk to you today has been hit. So this was kind of a cool slide because I just copy pasted and I was just like, oh yeah, we actually hit the goal on everyone, or I should say Eric, John, and Josh did, or Eric mostly, and John and Josh certainly helped out a little bit. So a little round of applause for them. So the other piece of news that those of you at NervesConf heard this, but we're going to have, and actually Josh is doing this. Josh has started Nerves Cloud, and if you're interested in using Nerves Hub on your devices at your house, and I can say, like, even if you're just using for a hobby, having a tool like this is pretty convenient. Check out Nerves Cloud. There's a sign up. I think right now, if you're watching this on video, maybe it's already live, but it's coming soon, and yeah, I think it's going to really help adoption in the Nerves community. All right, so moving on to the next part. So exploration. So what I mean by exploration here, so there's the stuff that we do because our companies want us to. There's this stuff that we do that are just very enjoyable things to do. We have some problem that we want to solve. We're not going to go out for funding to solve it because that makes no sense. Or maybe we just want to learn something. So a couple examples of these. Flora, who gave a presentation earlier, she has one at CodeBeam. You can look this up about how she used Nerves Livebook to experiment with puppetry, and that was a cool presentation. There was another one recently at ElixirConf EU, which was modifying a car to change out all the guts and then build the thing over with using Elixir, and of course Nerves on this, so that's the left one. So Mark has a presentation on that ElixirConf EU, which I don't think is posted quite yet, but hopefully will be soon, which I highly recommend. And then on the other side, Connor basically did has been doing a similar thing with his Miata, and he has custom electronics that run Nerves and does all sorts of things. And I just think that this is one of the most awesome things in the world, although I'm not sure I want to get in these cars. I'm like infinitely curious to live vicariously on all their posts. So here's another picture that Mark sent me, and I just thought was cool. I have nothing else to say about this, but it was a neat picture. So I'm hoping I'm giving you a flavor that this stuff, I love all this stuff. Like, this seriously makes this project fun for me. I want to continue to support the different libraries and other explorations that result in things like this. And to that end, there's a library called Elixir Circuits and Circuit Sim. We put in a ton of work on this particular library the past year. So this library lets you use Elixir and talk to most sensors, motors, controllers, other electronics So when you get into this, they run on like either need GPIOs, these I2C, SPI, UART, these kind of terms come up. Well, how do you interact with them? Elixir Circuits has a way of communicating with these devices, and then you can do stuff. We rewrote the GPIO one almost completely. So those of you who have used this in the past, I particularly recommend taking a look at that one. The other thing that problem has come up, which is how do you build software that runs with these devices offline or before you get them. That's Circuit Sim. It has simulated versions of some of these parts that do like a small fraction of what these parts do in real life, but let you write tests or just experiment with them, at the IEX prompt on your laptop. So the other part of this that I wanted to point out is that Masatoshi Masa over here maintains this Elixir Sensors GitHub org, which contains lots of these libraries used to interact with commonly available temperature sensors, other environmental sensors. So if you can't find something, there's a or if you're not quite sure what to buy, maybe look to see if it's on Masa's Elixir Sensors organization. So this isn't all of his code, but he coordinates it from a bunch of people and maintains this. Highly recommend it. So this next part, and this is on the exploration side, and I feel I heard this on the previous conversation about Erlang OTP, and I didn't expect this to be a hot take, but for me, the Erlang OTP is kind of an interesting source of knowledge and experience and things that I've been curious about exploring in the context of nerves. And with all the caveats, I agree with much of what was said at the previous presentations. But I wanted to point out one particular thing that exploration that is currently going well, and I know it's not something used that much in these communities, or in the Elixir community, and that's the SASL alarm handler. So probably a lot of you are very familiar with using events for passing things, but the alarm handler feature in OTP is almost completely unused, even at least in public open source context. I have since learned that a lot of people privately use this and just don't talk as much about it. So what are alarm handlers? So alarms are basically these Boolean, you can either have Boolean stateful cases like, this sensor is detecting a bad condition, or maybe something totally doesn't work, well, alarm goes on, then there might be something that remediates it, alarm goes back off. And I kind of think about this like Jira, except inside the embedded device, that one component is having trouble, it raises an alarm so something else can satisfy it. There are really only two function calls in OTP that do anything. So set alarm and clear alarm. Everything else is on your own. There's an alarmist library that is currently hosted at SmartRent, where we've been going through the things that make this useful to us. The other reference that I have is at Codebeam North America. I gave a little bit more in-depth talk about what we were doing this with alarms, what problems we ran into, how we were solving them, and we can also refer back to that. All right, so the next part, I wanted to get to some explorations because there are things that I'm very curious about, haven't had time. We've talked about this at the core team. I think a lot of you have opinions, and it is, since you all are here, it's kind of fun to talk about some of these things with all of you and hear your opinions. So one particular thing that's come up quite a bit is a nerves board. So it's kind of where do we graduate from Raspberry Pi? Raspberry Pi has served us well. Nerves runs on a lot of boards, a lot of us using for commercially used custom boards. Where do we go? What are the features that would make a lot of sense to your applications? Yeah, I'll leave it open like that. Very curious. Lars is super curious, so if you have really strong opinions, maybe find Lars and share some with him. And if you want to get more involved, talk to either of us. Another one is kiosks. So a few years back, actually no, this is pre-COVID. So there were more NERVS kiosk projects. The project maybe migrated back to more sensor aggregation gateway style apps because that fits Elixir Erlang very well. But back at the time, the kiosks were very interesting to a lot of companies. And I think things have changed in the community to where kiosks might be ripe to come back. There are a lot of technologies now that make it a lot more convenient. And my question to everyone is, which frameworks? Is Scenic? Flutter's have been a big one. The web browser, LiveView native. What do you see? Is any of this of interest to you? So curious on that. Those of you using NERVS Livebook, any NERVS Livebook users? Okay, a few of you. If you've run mix install, you'll be very sad. If you didn't mix install the thing that we built in already to NERVS Livebook, that's definitely a deficiency that limits the applicability of NERVS Livebook. It also runs into a couple other cases, and more widespread binary packages might be an answer to this. The other part, last one, machine learning. A couple of companies have been looking at this. We've avoided supporting machine learning for the open source ones just because the maintenance level is very great on a lot of the stuff that's out there. Curious about other people's experiences. Anyone's certainly doing this commercially in the room. If there's anything we can draw upon. There's definitely been interest in people pinging the core team on this. All right, so that's the exploration. This last one I wanted to talk about was people. And this one's a little bit, I don't know, I felt this is possibly one of the most important parts of NERVS for me, but possibly the one that I never really talk about and on these things, because when you're asked to give presentations like this, people usually want to know, like, what are all the new features? Tell me more about the technical details. But in some sense, the people involved with NERV projects is the main reason I am here and in this community. So I wanted to share a couple things. First of all, the early NERVS team. This is, people come in and out of your lives, right? There's a lot of stuff. People are super important. The relationships that I've had have built have been because code has brought me together with many of you. I totally enjoy this. I have had so many good experiences with this group, and then from people who I almost gave up doing NERVS, and people in this group pulled me back to do NERVS, and I'm so glad that they did. Some people I work with, some people I don't see near as much. Certainly have lots of good memories of that. Next picture, Bruce, Maggie, my daughter, and Sigu. So this NERVS got me the opportunity to actually take part in writing 2 books with Bruce, which I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in that. My daughter decided that she liked Elixir and got to hang out with Bruce's Elixir chat, which that was not expected. Thank you. And that definitely impacted her life. That was really important to me. Yep, and Maggie, of course, has been awesome. And Sigu was great to meet as well. So another picture, NERVS brought me into contact with NERVS JP, which this is when Zaki came over to the US and visited. This is when Massa lived kind of close to me in Washington, D.C. We went up and went hiking. So Zaki does a number of very interesting things with the Beam and with Elixir, and he's super fun to talk to. NERVS brought me to be able to collaborate with him, and Massa's been awesome on the core team. So this is another thing that I really appreciate. So, okay, John, good one. So for those of you who don't know, John and I like helped each other out with slides, and maybe I forgot to edit, or he added that one. So anyway, good one. And you just threw off my concentration. Okay, good. All right, so let me just move on to summarize that I hope that I've kind of shown like a little context on where these things come. If you're working with nerves and you want some feature and all of it, and I don't get it, and there's not enough time to get to it, know that it's not, because we don't want to. There's always going to be a way. A lot of us are in this for the long haul, and some of it's just figuring out the way to make it work, either with our employment, figuring out someone to collaborate with to explore something, or there's some of this stuff where some of us just want to work with certain people in the community, and if this is a really good excuse to collaborate, well, we'll take it. And for those of you new to open source and or maybe new in your careers, this has like been the coolest thing possible to find more cool people, super smart people, super nice people to work with, even if it's not on a topic that I would have picked when I started the project. So I'm going to wrap up. One thing I need to pitch is the NERF survey. John, Massa, me, and Josh are all looking to get a little temperature sense of where people are with nerves. So if those of you who haven't seen this, if you could all just give us like, I don't know, a couple minutes. It's not long. 7 minutes. It will help us out a lot. So with that, thank you. Thank you for your attention.